This video is brought to you by Ground News. Today, a new law in France is coming into effect, requiring adult websites to verify users' ages using personal data, in an attempt to curb minors' access to pornography. Unsurprisingly, this law hasn't gone down well with mainstream porn sites, and just a few days prior, Pornhub, along with its sister sites YouPorn and RedTube, blocked access to their websites within France in protest. So in this video, we thought we'd take a look at France's new anti-porn law and whether it will actually work. Never miss an episode and always feel in the loop by subscribing and ringing the bell. Let's start with some context. A few years ago, several scandals, most famously the French Bukkake criminal investigation, drew the public eye to the malpractices in France's porn industry and concerns of serious sexual and physical abuse of performers. In 2022, a French Senate report titled Hell Behind the Scenes was prepared for the French Parliament, which alerted the government to systemic abuse in the industry. This report also argued that children were heavily exposed to pornographic content and called for better age regulation. For context, with around 5.5 million pornographic websites operating in France alone, the average age of access to pornographic content for the first time in France, and in most of Europe, is around 13 years old. Although, according to some experts, some children are starting to consume pornography as young as 8, and in the last decade, the number of users younger than 13 accessing this type of content has been increasing. Unsurprisingly, the French public aren't too pleased about this. According to a survey of French citizens from 2023, 7 in 10 people reported they would be completely in favour of tougher age restrictions. In comparison, less than 1 in 10 respondents reported being quite against or very against a law blocking websites that don't enforce age restrictions for pornographic content. As such, decreasing the exposure of minors to pornographic content became a key priority for French legislators. At the start of 2020, speaking at UNESCO's celebration of the 30th anniversary of the Convention on Rights of the Child, French President Emmanuel Macron backed the idea of age regulation, saying, "We do not take a 13-year-old boy to a sex shop, not anything goes in the digital world." Then in July 2020, the French Parliament approved a mandatory age verification control on porn sites in an attempt to prevent access to children under 18, following the UK's lead. Unsurprisingly though, asking users to just tick a box saying they're over 18 didn't really work. So in 2023, the French government passed the so-called Siren Law, which introduced a new double anonymity system. For context, this is a 2-step age verification process that would require users to identify themselves with an official document, like a credit card or some form of ID, on a third-party platform, which would then validate their age and keep the pornographic platforms from seeking users' information and data. Then, the pornographic website would be able to grant access to the user without accessing personal names or other identifiable data. The French Parliament said that all porn websites operating in France would be under legal obligation to implement this system by the 7th of June 2025, and that the French media regulator, Arcom, can request that porn sites be blocked and issue fines if it finds their checks are lacking. In reaction to the restrictions, a handful of sites began legal proceedings to avoid its application. In fact, in 2024, 4 major porn sites were blocked in France after they refused to comply with the age verification law. Most recently, in anticipation of the June 7th deadline, in protest, the parent company of Pornhub, Aylo, decided to completely stop operating in France. On Wednesday, the 4th of June, French visitors to major adult sites like Pornhub, YouPorn, and RedTube were greeted not with explicit content, but with a message from Aylo denouncing the government demands that they verify users' ages. For their part, Aylo and other critics have 4 main complaints. First, they argue that it poses a risk to data privacy, taking particular issue with the requirement for a third-party platform to verify users' identities. Aylo, and others to be fair, argue that outsourcing age verification to external platforms could expose personal data to hacking, leaks, or malicious misuse, which could have disastrous consequences in the form of blackmail, embarrassment, or even targeted advertising based on sexual preferences. Second, Aylo maintains that the responsibility for age verification should not rest with adult websites. They argue that the financial burden of implementing and maintaining these costly age verification systems should really be on the tech giants like Apple, Microsoft, and Google, and for the age checks to be implemented at the device level. Essentially, Aylo's argument here is that if your phone can recognize your face to unlock itself, it will be better at knowing if you're old enough to access a porn site. Third, Aylo and others argue that these bans could open the door to broader internet censorship. Last year, Aylo actually argued that a similar law introduced in Texas infringed on adults' constitutional rights to access protected speech. But the fourth and perhaps most popular argument against these sorts of laws is that, well, they just won't work. These laws can be easily circumvented with virtual private networks, or VPNs, which allow users to mask their location and pretend they're in another country. These are cheap, easy to use, and widely available, even to minors. This makes bypassing national restrictions extremely trivial, and we can already see this unfolding. NordVPN have reported a 170% usage increase in France since Wednesday, and within half an hour of Aylo suspending its websites, ProtonVPN saw registrations increase by 1,000%. Similarly, there's a risk that banning mainstream porn websites could push people towards unregulated, darker parts of the web, which could ultimately make things worse. Nonetheless, despite these apparent risks, neither France's communications watchdog Arcom nor the French government have been put off, with the French Minister for Gender Equality posting au revoir on X in response to the news that Pornhub was pulling out of France, claiming there will be less violent, degrading, and humiliating content accessible to minors in France. And, well, in their defense, while there are clearly privacy and censorship-related risks to any sort of online ban, this doesn't imply that France should just give up on the law entirely, especially given the widespread consensus in France that porn is too accessible for minors. Rather, it just means that the French government should be especially cautious about how the law is implemented to best mitigate any risks. It's also worth remembering that when critics of online regulation warn about slippery slopes, the slippery slope fallacy is just that, a fallacy. Similarly, while it's true that there are easy ways around it, this doesn't invalidate the law either. No public policy or law is 100% effective. We have laws against murder, for instance, but murders still happen, and this doesn't mean we should give up on laws against murder. This law isn't going to make it impossible for minors to access porn, but as long as it makes it sufficiently more difficult, such that fewer minors see porn, then the French government can claim some success. If you want to know more about this topic, there's plenty of other outlets reporting about it online. Unfortunately though, it's sometimes hard to tell exactly which way these outlets lean politically, making it difficult to understand exactly how your view of world events is being biased by the sources you're reading. That's where this week's sponsor, Ground News, comes in. Their website and app, developed by a former NASA engineer, allows us to pull back the curtain on media bias and have a look at exactly how each story is being covered. For instance, this story about Pornhub exiting France has been covered by 138 different sources. We know that around 19 of these have been reported by the left, and 18 of these have been reported by the right. That's not all though. Ground News has tons of genuinely useful features. Take their blind spots feed, for instance. This shows you the stories underreported by one side of the political spectrum or the other. For example, if you lean left, you probably missed this story on a recent report that claims white British people will be a minority in 40 years. Here at TLDR News, we think that Ground News is an incredibly useful tool for our current media landscape, one that's constantly trying to attract your attention and sway you towards or away from certain political viewpoints. So having a tool that helps you spot this and helps you take action really is a game changer. If you're interested in everything Ground News has to offer, you can get 40% off the Unlimited Access Vantage Plan subscription by using the link in the description or scanning the QR code on screen. This limited time offer is only available here, so make sure you go to ground.news/TLDR or click the link in the description to get started and support an independent news platform working to make the media landscape more transparent.